Hey, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co, and today I'm reviewing Grimcoven by Awaken Realms. Grimcoven is a 1-4 player, I think, boss battler. I think the closest we can call this over here is a boss battler. It feels a bit like a roguelite, although I don't know if there are actual roguelite progressive unlocking elements. But either way, boss battler adjacent, we'll get into it, we'll explain all of it as we go through this, and of course, disclaimers and notes. This is a prototype, all rules and components subject to change, and of course, please take into account that I do work for GameFound. This game is being put out by Awaken Realms, and while two separate companies, they do have shared ownership. So please take into account any potential bias. I will be giving my thoughts, opinions, score, and all that, but by all means, if you are too concerned about that bias, which I think is reasonable, then there are plenty of other content creators who have their hands on this game, and you can get their thoughts from them. You can get other thoughts from them. Anyways, with that, let's go ahead and dive into this. This is Grimcoven, a 1-4 player roguelite slash boss battler, although again, I don't feel fully comfortable with either of those terms, although I think they do both feel somewhat appropriate. The general idea of the game is you're going to have your hunters over here. You're going to have a hunter over here. I'm set up with a hunter and a deputy right now, which is going to be how you manage solo play, but you could go ahead and have multiple hunters and go ahead and tackle all the enemies in front of you, but you're going to have a hunter, that's what you're going to have, or hunters that you're going to need to pick. You're going to have various minions who are in play. In this case, I have the convicted murderers as my minion of choice. You're going to have an elite enemy in play, which we have this guy over here, and I should note, by the way, this over here is an entirely fictional scenario, not the actual scenarios you have in the game. And then you're going to have the boss in play, so we have a boss, and then lastly, we're going to have the actual environment itself, as well as the various environment cards that will impact the game. So for example, right now we have the Witch's Tile, we have an effect on the river over here, we have this little piece over here, which is the Pile of Skulls, which has a gameplay effect. And so the combination of all those things are basically going to be the scenario that you're diving into. A variety of hunters, variety of minions, elite enemies, the boss, and the scenario. All those are going to give you the unique scenario that you're actually sitting down and tabling in this one-shot game. This is not a campaign game. This is a one-shot game where you go ahead and across the series of this adventure, you're basically trying to kill the boss before you die, and along the way you are leveling up and powering up your characters progressively, well, frequently. Frequently you're going to be leveling up and powering up your characters by taking these cubes over here, slotting them into your little track over here, and getting various unlocks each time you see that unlock symbol, which is a lot of unlocks. And also when you hit this spot over here, you're going to flip to your corrupted side and get a little more powerful as you go, while simultaneously swapping out your miniature, which is incredibly fun because your corrupted miniatures, they just look cooler, frankly. That's going to be the basic progression of what you're trying to do here. The problem is you're dealing with an enemy who is trying to kill you the entire time, and you need to make sure that you're dealing damage to the boss to take that boss out while staying one step ahead of the enemy. To that end, you're going to go through a sequence of steps every single round. We're going to start by checking to see if you have any of these cubes, which you can get these cubes from picking them up from various spots on the board, from these spots where you're going to spawn those cubes, but you're also going to get it from killing various things in the game. Anytime you kill a minion, you're going to be going ahead and getting one. You can go ahead and track in different cards over here, the boss cards, the enemy cards. You'll see over here, this elite enemy, when you kill it, you're going to get 3 of them. Over here, when you kill a boss card, you're going to get 3 as well, or 4 from this one. Because ultimately what you're trying to do is you're trying to kill the boss cards. We'll come back to that shortly, but when you kill the boss cards, that's going to be how you slowly deprive the boss of his health as you try to take him down. But meanwhile, going back to your character, any of those that you've earned, you're going to start the turn by placing them into these various spots over here. Then you're going to go ahead and draw a corruption card. The corruption cards over here, these are going to give you a range. So if you look over here at this card, you have a range of how much corruption you have to trigger different aspects of it. And sometimes they're negative. I say more often than negative, but they can be helpful or good too. You're going to look at how much corruption you have in your track. You're going to weigh it up against the card, each hunter doing so, and that's going to determine something else that happens. Gain a hunger, move 2 spaces, things like that. From there, you're going to go ahead and re-roll all your dice. So you're going to start with certain dice in the game based on the equipment you start with. So for example, over here, I have 3 blue dice and a purple dice, so we're going to go ahead and start with, and I'm going to use these dice to go ahead and drive my actions. We're going to roll these dice, and this is where the game is a dice placement puzzle. We're going to take these dice, putting them either on various cards. You can see over here, I have an upgrade card already. We have these basic actions over here, and then we have the various cards, the equipment you're going to start with, and you can place dice into those. So for example, I can go ahead and place this die here to deal 1 damage at range 2 and in line of sight. The problem is my hunter's over here. There's no one else who is in range 2, so I can't actually do that. Fortunately, what I can do is I can move. So for example, I can take this die, slot it into the move action, move my hunter's stat, which in this case is 2, and then move 1, 2, picking this up along the way, which will already help me start to power up, and then go ahead and place this over here, where I can deal 1 damage damage at range 2 in a line of sight and kill this guy, because minions by default have only 1 health, although they do have the possibility of gathering shields on them. In fact, this minion over here, if he's not attacking, he's going to be shielding up, so you kind of want to kill them as fast as you possibly can. That's going to be 2 of my dice already spent. I'm going to gain one of these from having taken him out over there. We can go ahead and put them in various spots on our board over here, and then we can go ahead and try to figure out what to do with our remaining 2 actions. So for example, in this case, based on where I am, I could try to gather this treasure. I could try to walk over here, but I might leave that for my deputy to gather instead. So let's say for right now, I might just try powering up. I'm going to go ahead and gather this and put it on that spot and load a bullet. Each character in the game is going to have their own way that they operate. The gunslinger in general is frequently loading bullets to be able to do more and more powerful shots in one single take. So right now I'm loading up a bullet, which I can discharge whenever I wish to take an attack to be able to power up my attack, dealing 1 additional damage. So from there, I load the bullet, and then my last die over here, I can put it in a variety of places, but I think for right now, we might just go ahead and load a second bullet. And again, I can discharge these at will, setting myself up for better and better attacks. So that's going to be my first turn. I've taken my actions over here. Not a lot happened, but because I do have 2 of these over here, in the beginning of next turn, I'm going to slot these in and be able to upgrade, which we'll talk about shortly. Then my deputy can go ahead and act, and I should note, strictly speaking, what you're supposed to be doing is you're alternating actions, taking 2 actions back and forth between the characters in the game. But you're going to go ahead, the deputy's going to start with these markers over here, a slightly simplified board, a slightly simplified card, although they will still upgrade themselves, and we'll talk more about upgrading soon. So maybe we go ahead and have this guy. Do I want to try to get this guy? I could move 2. Maybe I'll sprint. I might move sprint going over here, moving 1, 2, 3. My move status 2, but I'm going to move 3, 1, 2, 3, taking this treasure. Now keep in mind, I do know what the boss is going to do. You can see their current turn and their next turn coming up at any single point. But I'm going to go ahead, take this treasure, and I can heal 4, or I can go ahead and gain 2 of those. I think I'm going to go ahead and gain 2 corruption, because I think that's going to really help me power up, and it's worth it. The deputy does power up a little slower, which does make it a little less satisfying, but we'll come back to that. And then I'm going to go ahead and do an attack. I'll deal 1 damage in range 0 to 1, which means I'm going to kill this guy, taking this guy out and gaining another corruption. So I'm starting to clear the board of these minions, which is great until they come back, because they will come back. That's going to be my turn. At that point, the enemy is going to take their turn. They're going to take the turn following a specific 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 step. First, you're going to look and see if there's any event that you need to resolve. Right now, as the first turn of the game, there isn't. From there, we're going to go ahead and activate the minions. All minions on the board are going to follow their little activation. They usually have a kind of a if-then kind of situation, like they might be able to do something, in which case they do. If they can't, they go to the next action. In this case, they are looking to see if there's any enemies within range 3, I believe. Within range 0 to 3. In this case, there aren't. No enemies are within range 0 to 3. We can travel through portals on sprint actions, but the enemies don't have that option. So for right now, they're just going to instead shield up. So I'm going to go ahead and put these on the board. I will note the miniatures do have little shield holders. I'm just putting on the board so you can track it a little better. So you can go put it over here. You can track it in the shield holder, and then go ahead and have that 2 shield on them over there. Well, if it will slot into there. Anyways, that's going to be the way the minions operate. They either attack or they shield up. And again, different minions might have different activation sequences. From there, you go to the elite enemy, where the lead enemy is going to activate. This guy's over here. He's trying to get around to us as well, and he's going to move 2 right now because he can't get closer to us. Each space on the board can hold up to 4 models over there, and that's going to be his action. He's closing the distance, but right now we do have a little time, which is great because right now we're currently at our weakest. We need to power up in the game. Then from there, you're going to go have the boss take an action. The boss is going to look at his card. This says focused, move 2 spaces. Focus is the idea that in the game, you can deal damage to a boss card for one of 2 reasons. If I deal 8 damage to the boss, then I go ahead and kill that boss card, which is great because killing the boss card is an essential part of actually winning the game. So trying to deal damage to the boss card to be able to take it out is a big deal because you're going to get powered up, you're going to get corruption for it, and it's also, the boss is going to have a limited number of cards. Once you take them all out and deal with this final attack card, that's how you kill them. It can be hard. It can take time and process and dedication to really power up your character across the course of this adventure while surviving everything the game throws at you. So you are trying to deal enough damage to a boss card to actually take it out. That would be the ideal. In lieu of that though, there's still a reason sometimes to deal at least 1 damage per hunter. Right now is a 2-hunter game. If I deal 2 damage to the boss card, I'm going to ignore any focused abilities. Basically the boss is under pressure and he can't operate the way he ideally wants to, so we'd ignore that over there. So here, focus, move 2 spaces. In this case he's going to move 2 spaces, then move 2 spaces again. He's really running around the board. Attack each hunter in range 0 to 1 from the boss with 3 dice. So over here, in this case, he can just go ahead and move over here to close the distance. He can go ahead and roll 3 dice over here, and then you're going to look at his card to see what those dice do. In this case, we have 1 of each symbol over here, which means we're actually going to activate all of this, dealing 2 damage, then teleport the attacked hunter to a space with the closest tornado. So we're going to deal 2 damage to this guy, and then move him over there. We're going to put some markers down over here to mark that we are dealing damage to that hunter over here. Then we're we're going to go ahead and deal 2 damage for each shield on the attacked hunter. Fortunately, he didn't have any shield, so we don't take anything. And then just does 2 more damage alone, so we'll place that one with a 3. And we're already at 4 damage out of our 14 over here, which is something we need to keep track of as we go. From there, the boss card is going to be discarded. We're going to go ahead and put another one over there and reveal the next boss card as well. But step 5 over here is resolving this event card, which I'm realizing I didn't take the standee out over here. But there's going to be a little thing over here where you're moving from here. You're going to start in the center. You're going to draw a new event. Then activate all tornadoes, spawn minions, next stage. You're going on a cycle where every round you do one of those things, which basically means every 4 turns, you're revealing either a new stage, revealing new minions, activating tornadoes, drawing new events. There's bad things that will be happening to you, but they're happening every 4 rounds. So there's an incentive to take out the minions in the game because you're powering up through it and you're removing threats from the board. Just understand that more minions are going to be spawning every single new minion stage. That's basically the arc of how this game plays. There are other things to get into, but just to focus on the general overview of how this operates, is you are trying to gather various corruption across the board. You're trying to kill various things, anything from basic minions to elite minions to the boss cards themselves, because that's how you power up, gaining corruption yourself to be able to continuously power up, which is one thing we are going to show you over here, because at the start of your turn, if you do have corruption, you're going to slot it into the spots, and then you're going to draw 2 cards from your attack deck. And there is a specific deputy deck for the AI characters. Over here, we're going to go ahead and draw 2 cards. I'm going to look at them, and then either I grab one more card, which gives me a new way to place dice in the game, or alternatively, I put these both on the bottom of the deck, and instead I go ahead and take a new die from the pool, being able to add a new die to the game to be able to activate different abilities. So for example, over here, this character might want that astral die over here, which is the one I just grabbed, to be able to activate this particular ability. That blunderbuss can be very situationally powerful in the right situation, but I might need more purple dice to be able to reliably activate it, or blue dice for the shield element instead. So over here, an upgrade action basically has you either adding a new card to your repertoire, or alternatively adding a new die, both of which can be incredibly helpful. Usually you're going to be doing some combination of gathering new cards and new dice to be able to drive your action economy as forward as you possibly can to be able to take everything out. That's the basic arc of the game. Deal damage, take things out, gather corruption, power up, hopefully try to outpace the boss, because the boss is constantly dealing damage to you, and you are in a tough spot here. You need to be mindful of the boss cards. You need to be mindful of what the enemy's doing, how they're operating, in order so that you can stay one step ahead of them and ultimately survive long enough to take out the boss, because that is not an easy process. You really need to power up to be able to deal damage. The final boss cards can be devastating in what they do, and there is a final card. Once you've taken out all these cards, the boss will either shuffle. When the cards are gone over here and you reveal this card, you're either going to shuffle all the cards that are currently in the discard, put them back over here and continue the cycle, or if this is the only card left, you're going to reveal it, dealing with whatever kind of damage you have to deal with here, which again, they can be incredibly hard to deal with. And that's kind of what's going on in Grimcoven. It's a boss battler, you have hunters, you are leveling up and powering up across the 2 to 3 hours of the scenario, while you try to stay one step ahead of your opponent, dealing from drawing cards, upgrade cards from a very large deck of upgrade cards, that's going to give you a lot of different ways to build out and develop your hunter, while dealing with the unique circumstances that this scenario comprises of, from hunter to minions, to elite minions, to scenario, to terrain effects, to the boss themselves, and all of that. And with that, let's go ahead and dive into my review, starting off with ease of play. Ease of play is not the worst on this one. Now, I will note, in general, I found that Awakened Realms prototype rules are not always the best or easiest to get through, and I did have some questions on these as well that I had to reach out to the developer on. As usual, I hope these things will be cleaned up in a final game. This is a prototype, all rules, components, subject to change and all that, but definitely I still had the usual questions I do with an Awakened Realms game, but ultimately I'd say that this was one of the, at least again, you're comparing it to like their big box, Isis Vanguard, Tainted Grail, all of that. This is definitely an easier one to get up and running on, but still dealing with a chunk of rules to get through and understand all the setup and terrain and all these things and the scenario stuff, all of that stuff to get through. As far as the game time can easily run in that 2 hours plus range. I believe they say it's a 2 to 3 hour experience, and definitely, at least if you're not dying, that is. If you're dying, it can go quicker. If you're not dying, it can easily run in the 2 hour plus range and easily hit those 3 hours if you are someone who likes to think through your actions, take your time, process how to min-max everything, because sometimes you need to do that to be able to survive, so this game can take a time. Like, this is not for someone who wants to sit down for an hour and take down a challenge. That's not what this game is. I don't know if they plan on concluding scenarios that might have that easier time frame, length, whatever it is, but right now, it is, I think, in that 2 to 3 hour range. As far as what I like, don't like, and can see others not liking, starting off with with what I like, which to begin with is the miniatures in general, the miniatures and the aesthetic production. I generally like Awaken Realms games in terms of their production, but these particular miniatures I really enjoy. Like, I have a whole unboxing, you can check it out. I really enjoy the aesthetic of these miniatures. My Hunter right now, like the Hunter I've been using a lot, because this one over here, easily my favorite character, both in the way he loads up his weapons, which is a lot of fun to unleash like a 6 damage attack when you have enough cards on the table, but also just these sculpts over here. I find them incredibly satisfying. I love the aesthetic of this game, so overall a fan of that, the art, the aesthetic, and all of that. Past that, I'll say as far as the gameplay, I like the sheer amount of character development and powers and abilities that happen in this. This is a game that's all about leveling up. It's all about drawing new cards and finding new combinations of how you're going to build out and develop your character every single game. And that I just find a satisfying experience because I like powers and abilities, and this game does that. I do have some complaints we'll get to in the what I don't like section, but overall, the sheer amount of how often you are upgrading, gathering new dice, gathering new cards, leveling up your variety of characters in this, just make it a satisfying experience if you like that arc of getting more stronger, getting more powerful, while you take down an overwhelming force. And the force does feel overwhelming. The force does feel like it's very much something that you can't get past. The idea of being able to deal 8 damage to a boss card, 7 damage to a boss card to take it out, because you only have 2 turns to do so. You can attack the card while it's on the next turn phase, but then by that time it goes here, and once it cycles out, you lose all damage you've dealt to the card. So you really have to be able to take it down in a reasonable time frame. And when you're dealing with enemies coming at you from all sides, when you're just barely trying to stay alive, dealing with the minions, the elites, and then the boss themselves, it just feels overwhelming. And so that arc of feeling overwhelmed, the feeling like you can't make it, but then actually powering up, I do find that kind of experience satisfying. The feeling of getting over the hump, of getting over the part where you can't survive into the part where you're able to get everything done. And I like the fact that the game is very deterministic. You are rolling dice in this game, but it's a dice placement game. You're not rolling for the attack. The enemies roll for the attack, so what hits you is a little different, but there's a lot of deterministic ability in this game between your own actions and how you're going to use the dice you've already rolled towards certain abilities without having to worry about, like, will you hit, will you miss? You simply take the actions that you're taking, and then you also even know what the enemies are going to do. You know how each enemy is going to act, and while that might make it a game that's not as much for you, if you like that chaos or the uncertainty, if you like the ability to plan and optimize around what's going to happen, this game definitely gives it to you as you go through it. And there's a good balance of crowd control and actually dealing with the enemy who's there. The minions represent just enough of a threat that you're often in this arc of taking out the minions, which helps power you up, which is more satisfying, but then eventually you get into a cycle where you have a turn or two, and also once you take down the elite as well, because usually the arc, or at least for myself, the arc I found myself in, is taking out a bunch of minions to make my life a little easier, then trying to focus on the elite to get him out of the game entirely, and then from there taking down the boss, knowing that the minions are going to be popping back up every 4 rounds. And so that gives you a good arc of being able to deal with the small, inconsequential threats to power you up, while also giving you time to focus on the boss, which you will need to do so in order to actually win the game. And then I like the sheer variety of everything. The sheer variety of how you build out a scenario. I like the fact that it's not a campaign game, it is a single shot game that's going to give you an opportunity to have a large variety of how a game will play out, from the scenario to the hunters, to the equipment, to the minions, to the boss, to the elites, to everything about the game changes up game to game, which means you can realistically have a single shot game that feels drastically different every single time you dive into it, while still giving you that arc of character progression that can sometimes make campaign games so satisfying, but doing so in a single shot session. Granted, 2 to 3 hours of a single shot session. As far as what I don't like in the game, first of all, the early game dice can definitely not be satisfying, and that's even worse when you're playing the solo. I played this both solo and 2-player, and solo is worse. I do wonder if there might need to be some balancing around the deputy characters. I find that there's less growth as far as how they operate. They're a little simpler to activate, which is nice, but I think in the future, when playing the solo, I would exclusively play it with 2 full hunters as opposed to 1 and 1. I just find the full hunter experience just more satisfying. I do like what they're going for with the deputies. I like the full hunter experience more satisfying. But anyways, as far as the early game dice, it can definitely feel tough early game. Late game, it's not that big a deal to go ahead and have a few dice that don't work out well. You even have the opportunity to go ahead and spend a tactic to go ahead and re-roll your dice. The problem is when it's early game and you're only rolling a few dice, spending a full die to re-roll feels just as punishing as getting a bad roll, and especially early game when you have those minions crowding in on you, and that's when it's most beneficial to be able to take out, 3-4 minions in the first round. That can be incredibly punishing to not have a roll go your way early game. Later game, not as much of an issue. Early game, definitely an issue. I'll say spending a die to re-roll feels so punishing. Going back to what I said, spending that die to deal with a bad roll is just not a satisfying experience. And you will need, I will say, as far as one of the things that I did deal with as far as prototype, and we'll come back to some final thoughts, is I do find the prototype was definitely a little messy as far as dealing with things like just the sheer amount of cards and tokens, like cleaning this up to go ahead and deal from one boss to the next boss, the sheer amount of, like, all my cards are just in a giant stack. This is very much a prototype issue and should hopefully not be an issue in the final game, but I do try to cover what issues I've experienced along the way, just in case. So hopefully not an issue, but definitely is a lot of card decks to deal with, and I think it does need a good insert, good card management to be able to make the experience as smooth as possible. And then lastly, the thing I touched upon a little bit earlier is, as much as I enjoy the variety of card upgrades each character has, they have nice thick decks of card upgrades, so that in theory you'll never have to have the same combination of how you build out a character unless you are playing this game an absolute ton. But what I do find interesting, or not necessarily interesting, what I do find not as satisfying, is I think the variety of how different those cards feel, I didn't feel that as strongly as I'd like. Very often I'll draw a bunch of cards and feel like, okay, I could take this one or this one. It's which symbols, meaning sometimes it's very helpful or fun or satisfying to get a good card that feels like it works into my engine, and other times it feels like I'm just drawing a bunch of cards that the only difference between them is which symbol activates it, which just didn't feel as interesting. I love the idea of growing the hunters. I love the idea of developing them as you try to figure out different arcs or pathways of how to build each character as you go through the game. But to me, the thing I definitely want is I want each hunter to feel interesting and clever and have combinations of cards that really augment each other well. And if you're playing as a hunter, like if you're playing as the gunslinger right now, half the cards are going to be ways to load ammo, which is both helpful and useful, but I wish there were more cards that did different things that were more interesting as far as how they operate. Have a card that's like, you know, hey, if you unload 3 bullets in a single turn, you get to go ahead and deal an extra 3 damage. Boom, suddenly that card is augmenting and building off the things you've been doing. I didn't feel that sense of cohesion from their decks just yet. I think there's a lot of potential to the way they can grow how cool a character feels across that 2 to 3 hours of play. As far as I can see others not liking, the game's hard. The game definitely feels hard, which again makes it rewarding when you actually win, but this is a game where you can play it for 2 to 3 hours and then lose at the end. You have to be okay with that kind of experience, at least right now. And again, I don't know if they have plans for like difficulty scenario, like difficulty grading for scenarios or bosses or enemies and things like that. I think it's a good idea to have that for players who want different things, but right now I would just say it's hard. Doable, but hard. There's also a smaller concern around replayability aspects. There is a whole secret deck of things you can do, like right now in this witch's hut, depending which choice over here you do, you're going to go ahead and read a secret and have an in-game consequence. Once you've played the game, you'll know more what those things do. I don't think it's a huge issue, but if you really want everything fresh, just noting, some things are going to be like, oh, I know if I go to the witch's hut, the thing that's better for me this game is to discard instead of, well, not discard, to speak to the witch instead of stealing her items or whatnot. That's going to be a small little thing to note. As far as final thoughts on this one, I really like the core structure of Grimcoven. I really like it, the overall core structure I really like. I had a few complaints. I think the biggest ones for me are going to be what I think are prototype issues, the sheer level of card management, token management, deck management, all that stuff. I do think that the game experience would be smoother or more streamlined with a good insert helping you along the way. For me, the biggest thing that holds the game back a bit is that as much as I like the overall arc, I didn't get that sense yet of cohesive, I don't know, coolness is the right word I'm looking for. That sense of how interesting a character build can feel as you combine a bunch of cards. And maybe I just haven't seen the right combinations. I haven't fully gone through every single card yet, and so it's possible I haven't yet seen that, but the overall sense I got was as much as it's satisfying to build a character, I guess for me, it often felt like choosing another die was just as good, if not better, until I was overwhelmed by dice and just needed more cards. Whereas I ideally want to feel that the only time you ever really grab dice is because you just need to manage your economy. I want the cards to feel that much cooler. I always want the cards. Even if I have to take a dice, I want the cards. So that's the main thing that I want different. As far as rating on this one, currently for me it's a 4 out of 5. I overall enjoy the arc of it, and I'm looking forward to the final game. As far as other game recommendations, first of all, another game that has a similar in-game arc and development, but it's very ambitious, a great game if you can actually sit down and table it. Highly recommend checking out Mage Knight and Mage Knight the board game. Phenomenally well done game that gives you that sense of progression as you go through what's not a 2 to 3 hour experience, but what can easily be a 3 to 6 hour experience as you go through it, but is incredibly satisfying. And then on a similar note, if you're looking for that in-game progression, although again it can run a little long depending, I'd say Too Many Bones from Chip Theory Games is another one that very much gives me that in-game session, not a campaign game, but the in-game arc of just powering up as you try to deal with overwhelming odds and an eventual boss in a very different arc of the way it structures it, but overall very similar feelings of satisfaction as you build and upgrade your characters across the course of the experience. In any case, until next time, I'm Alex Radical from Board Game Co. I hope you enjoyed this video, and as always, I hope you have a good one.